Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a really fascinating tension between an incredibly famous ancient text and modern scientific critiques. You know the story. There's this well-known parable where Jesus of Nazareth compares the kingdom of heaven to a mustard seed, which he explicitly calls the smallest of all the seeds on the earth. Now, for centuries, people just read this as a beautiful, simple metaphor. But in our modern era, skeptics and debaters have raised a massive red flag. They point out a simple, undeniable biological fact. The mustard seed is absolutely, definitively not the smallest seed in the world. So what happens when a 2,000-year-old parable collides head-on with modern microbotany? Does this actually prove the speaker was just scientifically ignorant? Let's find out.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to take a quick journey through the mustard seed dilemma, check out the ancient agricultural realities, unpack the rabbinic proverbial idiom, look at why meaning matters more than microbotany, and finish up with the mastery of metaphor.
Starting with Section 1, the mustard seed dilemma. So, was Jesus mathematically and scientifically wrong? Honestly, it's a completely valid literalist objection to raise. In a lot of interfaith dialogues and academic critiques today, you'll hear an argument that goes something like this. If Jesus was divine and had omniscience, well, he'd know all the facts about the universe, right? Yet he claimed the mustard seed was the smallest seed. Since we know today that it isn't, he clearly lacked omniscience. It's a very direct, modern scientific challenge to the ancient text. And when you look at global botanical data, the dilemma is super clear. The black mustard seed, or Brassica nigra, which is the exact seed referenced in the ancient Levant, is definitely small. It's roughly 1 to 2 millimeters in size. But if you look at an epiphytic orchid seed from the rainforest or certain pepper spores, they are practically microscopic. You literally can't even see them with the naked eye. So definitively, modern global botany proves the mustard seed is not the smallest seed in the world. Moving right along to Section 2. Ancient agricultural realities. Now, what's really interesting here is how historical sources reconcile this clash. The historical scholar Alfred Edersheim hits the nail on the head when he points out that parables were never meant to be biology textbooks. A parable is literally something thrown beside something else. It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It was designed to paint a vivid, immediate picture for the popular mind of the day, using the actual dirt and seeds those people touched every single morning. And what were they actually touching? While mustard wasn't just some random weed you'd casually yank out of your garden, it was a specifically cultivated, heavily regulated crop. Ancient Jewish texts like the Mishnah outline incredibly strict rules, specifically in Kiliayim 2:9, about exactly how many patches of mustard a farmer could legally sow in a grain field to prevent crop mixing. Plus, the original text in the Gospel of Mark specifically qualifies this mustard seed as being sown upon the ground. We are not talking about some wild, undiscovered plant deep in the Amazon. Out of all the seeds intentionally planted by local Levantine farmers in Palestinian fields, the black mustard seed actually was practically the smallest one they ever handled. Which brings us to a massive takeaway. Jesus wasn't teaching global botany. He was referencing local farming. The context of the text was entirely restricted to the seeds deliberately sown by agricultural workers in that specific local geographic region. To a first-century Judean peasant with dirt under their fingernails, the mustard seed was the absolute smallest thing they ever put into the ground. Section 3. The rabbinic proverbial idiom. But it goes even deeper than just farming. If we step further back into the cultural mind of an ancient Near Eastern listener, things get really fascinating. Just like we use figures of speech today, like saying someone is quiet as a mouse, ancient Jewish cultural traditions had their own idioms. To them, the mustard seed wasn't just a plant. It was a standard unit of measurement. Jewish rabbis historically used it as a universally understood metaphor for the smallest conceivable thing. It's basically the cultural equivalent of how we might use the word atom today to describe something incredibly tiny. And the historical texts back this up so beautifully. If you look at rabbinic literature like Mishnah Nida, they actually use the mustard seed to measure the tiniest conceivable drop of blood, or the absolute smallest particle for ritual purity laws. Over in Mishnah Nazir, they even use the mustard seed to describe the shortest conceptual measurement of time. So Jesus wasn't introducing some novel scientific claim here. He was simply tapping into a well-established, everyday cultural idiom that every single person in his audience already used and understood. These ancient texts rely heavily on accumulated cultural wisdom. To really understand them, we have to respect the language and the idioms passed down through generations. If we just strip that idiom away and force a rigid, modern scientific lens onto it, we're actually destroying the original intended meaning. Section 4, Meaning over Microbotany. So, the crucial point is 10 to 12 feet. If this wasn't a lesson in absolute biology, what was the actual purpose of the parable? It's all about this massive growth. That tiny 1 or 2 millimeter seed we just talked about, once it's planted, it grows into a massive bush-like shrub. Historical travelers to Palestine have noted seeing mustard plants that grew so remarkably large they could literally overtop a full-grown man riding on a horse. It's an absolutely astonishing visual when you stop and think about it. The sources highlight that this massive contrast is the true focus of the parable. Certain small, seemingly insignificant beginnings lead to huge, overwhelmingly influential ends. The story is entirely about the radical, organic development of a movement. It starts at something you can barely even see between your fingertips, and it explodes into a massive, undeniable reality. And the parable concludes by noting that these massive branches become a shelter where the birds of the heaven can nest. Now, this isn't just a quaint little nature detail. To a first-century Jewish listener, that imagery of nesting birds connects directly back to Old Testament visions, like the ones in Ezekiel and Daniel, where great empires and kingdoms are described as massive trees, providing ultimate shelter and lodging for all people. Finally, Section 5. The mastery of metaphor. Let's tie all these threads together. A parable, by its very definition, is art harnessed for service. It's meant to take incredibly abstract, complex theological ideas and bring them right down into concrete reality for the listener. The speaker here was an itinerant rabbi mastering cultural pedagogy. He was adapting profound cosmic truths for an audience of peasant farmers using the exact tools they had right in front of them. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of divine accommodation. Divine accommodation means communicating truth in the exact language, idioms, and agricultural realities of the immediate audience, so the message actually lands. The communicator meets the audience exactly where they are. And this is exactly why this matters for us today. When we read ancient texts, we cannot force our modern scientific grid onto their ancient poetic structure, or we completely miss the point. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. Imagine the scene for a second. What if Jesus had stood up and said, "The kingdom of heaven is like an epiphytic orchid seed from the South American rainforest"? Would that first-century Judean farmer have understood the message? No way. They would have been completely alienated, and the profound point about the massive growth of the kingdom would have been totally lost. When you analyze it in its proper historical and cultural context, this ancient text isn't a display of cognitive ignorance at all. It's a masterclass in effective communication. It shows us that to truly understand ancient sources, we have to learn to speak their language first. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring.